In today's video, you're going to learn about the difference between the bishops and knights and which of the two pieces is more powerful in one. I'm going to put a timestamp for those of you who don't want to hear theory so that you could go to practice right away. And for those of you who would like to learn more about the concepts and the reasons why one piece is usually better than the other, I'm welcoming you to be listening to a couple of very important concepts. So I want to start with the math that on average bishop is worth 3.5 when you have one bishop. And if you have two bishops, it's considered that each bishop is worth 3.75. Now, the reason for that is that when you have two bishops, one of the weaknesses of individual bishop disappears. You can have access to both colors with the two of them. Now, when you have a knight, on average is worth 3.25. So it's not because knight is inferior piece to the bishop, but there are simply more positions that favor bishop compared to the knight. Now, first of all, I want to mention that today we're going to be looking at the endgames, but very similar, these concepts can be used in understanding the difference between the two in any opening and middle game position most of the time. When you're playing with the bishop, you usually want to put the pawns on the opposite color to your bishop so that they would be cooperating and covering as much squares on the board as possible. So if your bishop is a dark square, usually most of the time you want to put pawns on the light color. So then pawns cover light, bishop covers dark, everybody's happy. However, exceptions come when you have a long distant pawn of some sort that you want to be defending. So maybe you're attacking on, say, the left side of the board, and that's where you're pushing for a pass pawn. Opponent's attacking you on the right side of the board, and you have this little pawn here while your bishop is on the other side of the board. Perhaps then you would want to keep it on the same color so that your bishop from a long distance would be protecting that. Another thing to say is that bishops like positions that are open, and open positions are usually with 5 or less pawns for one side. If it's 6, it's considered semi-open, semi-closed, and 7 or more is considered to be closed. Now, the bishop likes also not only open positions, but one plays on both flanks. So that means that if you have 2 pawns on the left, say the queen side, and 2 pawns on the right, say the king side, that favors the bishop. But if you have 3 pawns in total, position is open, but all of those pawns are on one side of the board, we usually prefer the knight. You see, the knight, it's a beautiful piece that is a very short range. It can jump over stuff, but the problem is that if plays on both wings, it cannot serve as a defender of one side and attacker on the other side, and that's something that bishops can do. So with the knights, you're looking for weak squares and outposts. If knight can land on such square, it's considered to be a very strong knight, especially if it's active there deep in the hearts of opponent's position or has an important function like attacking a weak pawn of opponents, preventing opponent's king from reaching certain squares, supporting your pass pawns. You could be creative when you're finding functional reasons for your pieces. When you're playing with the knight, usually in opening and middle game, there's an old Capablanca rule that you place your pawns on the color of opponent's bishop. So if your opponent has a dark bishop and you have a knight and you want to restrict opponent's bishop, you do put pawns on the same color. Now the exception is, and here's a caveat, when opponent's bishop can go around and start targeting the weak pawns of yours. So when you're placing the pawns on the same color as opponent's bishop and you play with the knight, the danger is if you see a way that your opponent's bishop can go around and target the weak pawns. If the position is closed enough, it shouldn't be happening. If you're active enough and can prevent your opponent's bishop from reaching those squares, it's again considered to be good. Most of the knight versus bishop endgames are won by king invasion. King is the most powerful piece on the board there. It's estimated of 4 points of or higher value. And so most of the time you prioritize the activation of the king, unless there is something obviously great to do with the pawns or bishop or the knight. And then at some point, your king is going to be invading opponent's weak pawns or going to support the pass pawns that you have. And this way, you're going to be winning the game, as you will see in many examples. Pawn structure plays a crucial role. Of course, we want to make a new queen. And I always remind my students that the general 3 strategies in all of endgames are making a new queen, attacking the weak pawns of opponents, and usually the first one that we should be doing is activating our pieces. You could also say that the 4th thing is to prevent your opponent from doing all of these things. So what? You have heard some theories and the concepts, so now it's time to put it all to practice. So let's set up a position. This is one of the famous positions that we have out there. And what I want to look at here is evaluation. How would we evaluate such position if we see it for the first time? Well, I look at the king activation. It's black to play, so black can reach usually further squares if we start at similar places, right? So kings are starting at corresponding squares. The second thing I would look is the openness of the position. We have pawns on both flanks and the position is open. So a plus for black so far because of the openness of the position. Bishop is better. Plus for black because their king is first one to move, so it's going to reach more active position. And the pawn structure seems to be symmetrical. There are no fixed pawns in the position, so the color doesn't matter of non-fixed pawns because they can be changing. And we could observe that both grandmasters here who are playing with the pieces just started by moving their kings to the absolute center. Now black's king reached further up the board and is looking to invade into the opponent's position, and black figures out that if we go bishop c8, bishop a6 here, we're going to land a check, and then depending on where opponent's king goes, left or right, our king can go the opposite way. So a big mistake for white would be trying to place the pawns right now on the same color as opponent's bishop, because white is defending and position is open, and that was what I was talking about earlier, that if you could see a way for opponent's bishop to go around, like here bishop c8, bishop a6, and target those backward pawns that you have created, obviously this is bad for white, and he should recognize the openness of the position and the fact that he is defending, and h4 is a better move, placing the pawns on the opposite color to opponent's bishop already here. So black goes bishop c8, and black beautifully recognizes the dynamics of the white's knight and makes restrictive moves. For example, h6, white knight wants to land on f5, so we go g6. And then at some point we have time and actually invade the opponent's position. And this is not a fair battle for white because it's king plus bishop against the knight really on that side. And little by little black is creating a weakness. The knight will just be losing to the king, and black won the h4 pawn and later won the game. So this endgame is very hard to hold even though material is equal. I believe if two masters play most of the time it would be a headache for white to be guarding such position. Let's take a look at another example. Let's evaluate this position. White's king reached further up the board, so a plus for white. Position is open with pawns on both flanks, so again, plus for the bishop. White must be close to be winning here. So we want to invade with the king. White goes bishop e2. Black can wait on these three squares, but we're going to land the check and hopefully force the black's king to choose one of the sides when our king can go the opposite direction. So king e6, and black is setting up a trap. If white is going a6, let me put a mark here of a blunder. Then black can actually draw by sacrificing the knight. And this endgame is known as the opposite color bishop, the wrong color bishop endgame, where black's king can simply reach the corner, and there's no way for white to get that king out of there because of stalemating ideas. So maybe I should make a video about that in the future, but I want you to just trust me, this is a draw. White is a very good player and he knows this, so he just gives a check, and depending on where black goes, left or right, we're going to try to win the opposition and invade the opponent's position. So if say king f6, white can go king f4, and black's king runs out of moves that he could hold the sixth rank with, and with the next move white is going to be making progress. And of course if the knight moves, then we can simply push the pawn up the board. So instead in the game black's king went left, and now we're going the opposite direction, and that's why bishop is so powerful. It could be supporting the offense and at the same time be sacrificed if needed defensively, and knight is helpless against these two passed pawns. White is simply winning the game over here. Let's take a look at example like this. Here maybe we don't have to look at the intricate details of the position, but just evaluate that even though the position is opened, knight is a far more powerful piece because of a short range combat that is taking place. So knight is favored usually in short range combats, and the black's dark square bishop is terrible because it has the pawns fixed on the same color. So it's very passive, and opponent's knight can land on beautiful squares like c4, f5, and with the right play, white can hope to win the position. And one example for my advanced students, I recently gave this to one of my master students, and I thought that it would be appropriate to show in this video as well. White to play, I want you to pause the video and figure out what would you play here with the white pieces and what's the valuation. So position is opened, plays on both flanks, so obviously we favor the bishop. Now, the only thing that is not clear is the activity of the king. And Even though we have a passed pawn, Black's knights for now is supporting that and defending us from promoting the pawn. It seems like the most natural plan would be just to move the kings to that side of the board. So for example, the line could look like this, and Black's king is perfectly stopping the White's king from making progress. And now if you try to target the king side, they're going to be defending those weaknesses by putting them on the light color. So what White needs to do here is to force Black's king to stay put on the king side by fixating one of those pawns on the dark color. So see, now when I play h5, Black's king is unable to go to the middle because I can always win that h6 pawn over there. And so Black's knight is paralyzed, always having to babysit the b pawn. And even though we drop the h pawn, little by little, we're going to be winning this position, because bishop and king wins against the king. And this was the game. Now, on the next move, we can take on h5, then we take on f4, and White can win by promoting the f pawn. So the key idea from this is not this technique of how you actually convert that, but recognizing the need of fixing the weakness on the king side in order to make sure that opponent's king remains passive. If you find this useful, consider hiring me as your personal online chess coach. I thank you for watching the video, and I will see you in the next lesson. Bye-bye.